Voltaire, French drip with the egg noodle hair, one of the most prolific writers and philosophers of the Enlightenment. He was a master at constructing thorough, engaging, and particularly pointed rhetoric through the written word. Even knowing all that, I was not expecting to find out that he wrote a sci-fi story, in the 18th century, predating even Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is widely considered to be the first true science fiction story ever written, by over half a century. The story is wonderfully called Micromega, or Micromegas in French, and it's a true Voltaire experience, full of wit, satire, and irony, but all with an intriguing cosmic spin. Believe it or not, Micromegas is the first known story ever to feature an extraterrestrial visit, over 150 years before H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds. But Micromegas is no War of the Worlds, or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or even Arrival. It's one of those stories that's so weird, you kinda just have to hear it for yourself. So here it is. The story begins on an alien planet orbiting the star of Sirius, where our main character Micromegas is born. He is an extraordinary being, standing at over 120,000 feet tall, and is said to have 1,000 senses, compared to the meager 5 that humans have. His long lifespan, which extends for millions of Earth years, allows him ample time for philosophical contemplation and scientific discovery. He is highly intelligent and curious, and, with this knowledge, writes a groundbreaking book detailing his observations about life, the universe, and the pursuit of knowledge. However, his ideas challenge the established doctrines of his Syrian society, leading the authorities to deem his work heretical. As punishment, Micromegas is exiled for 800 years. Instead of lamenting his fate, though, Micromegas embraces the opportunity for exploration, setting out on a journey through the cosmos in search of even greater knowledge. His voyage eventually brings him to our own solar system, and particularly the planet Saturn, where he encounters an intelligent but significantly smaller being, the planet's most distinguished philosopher. The Saturnian, though minuscule compared to Micromegas, still measures an immense 6,000 feet in height. The two intellectuals engage in a lengthy discussion about the nature of existence, knowledge, and the absurdities of their respective societies. The Saturnian laments his species' relatively short lifespan of about 15,000 years. He also complains about the limitations of his planet's science and philosophy, feeling that true knowledge remains elusive. Micromegas, understandably, is utterly amused by this, and explains that even his 1,000 senses do not provide a complete understanding of the universe. They discuss their civilization's beliefs, critiquing dogma, superstition, and the arrogance of those who claim to have absolute knowledge. The two, united in their curiosity, decide to travel together to explore the universe further. They wander through various celestial realms before reaching a small, seemingly insignificant blue planet called Earth. Micromegas and the Saturnian initially dismiss Earth as uninhabited because of its tiny size and apparent lack of significant activity. From their perspective, Earth seems as trivial as a grain of sand. However, using a diamond lens to examine Earth's surface, they notice the presence of minuscule life forms, which just so happen to be human beings. At first, they assume that creatures so tiny must be little more than mindless insects, incapable of rational thought. To their astonishment, though, they observe ships crossing the ocean, armies marching into battle, and whole cities teeming with life. The Saturnian is utterly confused, thinking that such tiny creatures could never possess souls or grasp the mysteries of existence. However, Micromegas argues that physical size shouldn't determine intelligence and proposes a closer examination of the species. Using careful precision not to accidentally kill them, Micromegas and his companion make contact with a group of European scholars, French scientists and philosophers who are traveling aboard a ship. In other words, the finest intellectuals that Earth has to offer. To communicate, Micromegas crafts a kind of giant megaphone from his fingernail, allowing the humans' tiny voices to be amplified, so that he and the Saturnian can hear them. Once a dialogue is established, the aliens begin questioning the humans and their knowledge of the universe. Micromegas asks what they know about astronomy, The scholars proudly explain their celestial theories. They believe that Earth is of huge cosmic importance, and that their discoveries represent the pinnacle of scientific achievement. The extraterrestrials, of course, find this laughable. Next, the aliens inquire about human morality and governance. The philosophers describe wars, religious conflicts, and the rigid hierarchies of their societies. Micromegas is horrified at this. He can't fathom how such fragile creatures spend their brief existences slaughtering one another over arbitrary differences. The Saturnian is significantly less understanding than Micromegas. He grows frustrated with the humans' self-importance. He scoffs at their claims of superiority, noting that despite their small size and miserably short lifespans, they act as though they are masters of the universe. Despite his frustration, Micromegas decides to leave the humans with a parting gift, a book that he claims contains the entire truth of the universe. The humans eagerly receive the volume and open it with reverence. However, to their shock and confusion, every page is blank. So, there's a lot to unpack with this story. But the big question is, why aliens? As I said, this is one of the earliest known stories to feature extraterrestrial life, and, more importantly, the first story ever to feature aliens coming to our planet, and not the other way around. In other words, it's the first story that seems chiefly interested in the technological and intellectual gap between humans and aliens, in which aliens are, by far, the superior. The story obviously comes off the heels of very important astronomical discoveries of the previous centuries, such as Copernicus's heliocentric model and Galileo's discovery of the 4 main moons of Jupiter, both of which went against the previously uncontested notion that Earth, and by extension humankind, was the center of the universe. Because of these discoveries, it became natural that people began to question whether or not humankind was actually God's only intelligent creation, or if the vast universe might be populated by other life forms, maybe even ones that were bigger, stronger, and smarter than us. When one of the Earthlings attempts to explain the belief that humankind is the center of the universe to the 2 extraterrestrials, this is what happens. He looked the 2 celestial inhabitants up and down. He argued that their people, their worlds, their suns, their stars, had all been made uniquely for mankind. At this speech, our 2 voyagers nearly fell over with that inextinguishable laughter which, according to Homer, is shared with the gods. The incomprehensible knowledge that both the Syrian and the Saturnian had gathered over their immense lifespans is symbolic here of humankind's ever-shrinking place in the universe, which, at the time, was making the idea that all the universe was made to house us and us alone seem more and more ridiculous. All of that to say, what Voltaire proposes with Micromegas is the final nail in the coffin to the idea of Anthropocentrism. Earth was first downgraded from the center of the universe to just another planet. Then it was revealed that it is not the only planet with a moon, and finally, in Micromegas, we discover that we are not the only intelligent species in the universe, and we are far from the greatest. This is consistent with Voltaire's long track record of criticizing Christianity, and more specifically the Catholic Church, who, at the time of the publishing of Micromegas, still refused to acknowledge heliocentrism. While the story itself is only a piece of fiction, and not a scientific account, the questions that it posed alone were high hurdles for the contemporary Christian doctrine to pass. The very idea of intelligent extraterrestrial life ultimately calls into question God's relationship with humankind. Are we truly the only ones made in His image? Are we the only ones eligible for salvation, or can aliens be redeemed as well? And the big question, if aliens do exist, why is there no mention of them in the Bible? Making Micromegas an alien and making him the main character of the story also presents an interesting opportunity for playing with perspective. In other words, by setting the story in the perspective of Micromegas, Voltaire makes humans the quote-unquote aliens of the story, and allows them to be examined from an outside perspective, which ultimately shows the idea that the universe was created for us to be unconscionable. While Voltaire himself believed in God, he was a deist, not a practicing Christian. Deism is basically the belief that God created the universe and then went to sleep. Deists don't believe that God interferes with the universe in any way, including miracles, divine intervention, and, probably most relevant to Voltaire's time, divine right. And that leads us to the next section. Micromegas is not only critical of religious dogma, but political and nationalistic dogma as well. Upon first encountering the humans, Micromegas himself is overwhelmed with jealousy for them, because he believes that creatures as tiny as us must have proportionally simple needs and desires, and are therefore not shackled by the woes of bureaucracy, politics, and, indeed, dogma. O intelligent atoms, in which the eternal being desired to make manifest his skill and his power, you must, no doubt, taste pure joys on your planet, for having so little matter and appearing to be entirely spirit, you must live out your life thinking and loving, the veritable life of the mind. Nowhere have I seen true bliss, but it is here, without a doubt. The humans, understandably, are completely baffled by this. One of them steps up to explain the irony. We have more substance than is necessary, he said, to do evil, if evil comes from substance, and too much spirit if evil comes from spirit. Did you know, for example, that as I am speaking with you, there are 100,000 madmen of our species wearing hats, killing 100,000 other animals wearing turbans, or being massacred by them, and that we have used most of the surface of the earth for this purpose since time immemorial? The Syrian shuddered, and asked the reason for these horrible quarrels between such puny animals. It is a matter, said the philosopher, of some piles of mud as big as your heel. It is not that any of these millions of men that slit each other's throats care about this pile of mud. It is only a matter of determining if it should belong to a certain man, who we call Sultan, or another who we, for whatever reason, call Tsar. Neither one has ever seen, nor will ever see the little piece of earth, and almost none of these animals that mutually kill themselves have ever seen the animal for which they kill. There are many, many, many ways to make war seem pointless, but trying to explain it to an alien god who only learned that such a concept exists just a few minutes prior might take the cake. By forcing the humans to frame war in such blunt terms, in a way that Micromegas can understand it, Voltaire exposes just how laughable the entire state of affairs is. This is another example of why making Micromegas an alien is pure genius. His otherworldly size and experience forces the humans to rationalize war and patriotism in a way that makes sense from his cosmically huge perspective, and, in doing so, lay bare the actual ways that war and patriotism work. What Voltaire engages here is basically anti-propaganda. He strips the framing of the conflict down to its barest elements. At the end of the day, war is really just men wearing different kinds of hats, killing each other, so that their respective leader can control what amounts to a tiny pile of mud on a cosmic scale. And it is the leaders who benefit, and not the soldiers. Furthermore, it is not they that should be punished. It is those sedentary barbarians who, from the depths of their offices, order, while they are digesting their last meal, the massacre of 1 million men, and who subsequently give solemn thanks to God. More than this, though, what I love most about this section is how envious Micromegas is, and how he thinks that humans are, quote-unquote, all spirit. What he basically means by this is that our tiny bodies and brief lifespans must, proportionally, give our lives so much more meaning and purpose. And, from a philosophical perspective, that at least seems reasonable. And yet we waste what little matter and spirit we have on killing each other, for no reason. While the scholars that Micromegas and the Saturnian encounter at least seem to have some self-awareness about the insignificance of war and the scale of the cosmos, they are ultimately shown to be no less dogmatic than their peers. It's a classic Voltaire move to use fiction to criticize fellow philosophers, and this story is no different. Here, each scholar on the boat represents a different school of thought. Finally, Micromegas said to them, "Since you know what is exterior to you so well, you must know what is interior even better. Tell me what your soul is, and how you form ideas." The philosophers spoke all at once, as before, but they were of different views. The oldest cited Aristotle. Another pronounced the name of Descartes. This one here, Malebranche. another Leibniz, another Locke. An old peripatetic spoke up with confidence. The soul is enteleki, and a reason gives it the power to be what it is. This is what Aristotle expressly declares. Page 633 of the Louvre edition. He cited the passage. Voltaire takes particular aim at the Aristotle fanatic. "I do not understand Greek very well," said the giant. "Neither do I," said the philosophical mite. "Why, then," the Syrian retorted, "are you citing some man named Aristotle in the Greek?" "Because," replied the savant, "one should always cite what one does not understand at all in the language one understands the least." As each of the scholars makes their case for their perspective on the universe, it becomes clear that all of them are tied to the idea of anthropocentrism in some way. Once again, Voltaire makes use of the status of Micromegas as an alien to show an important idea: the relativity of knowledge. Each philosopher believes that their philosophy is the only one which accurately describes the universe. But by framing them all as equals before an alien with much vaster knowledge than any of them can hope to possess, they are all equally shrunken. By doing this, Voltaire shows that philosophies are not absolute, but relative, dependent entirely upon a single being's perspective, and not some almighty universal truth. The philosophers can be said to be no better than the soldiers that they criticize for waging war for men which they have never seen in their lives. Their philosophical warfare, while less physically violent, is no less fueled by blind, dogmatic loyalty. Still, Voltaire shows that no amount of cosmic knowledge can make a being immune to dogma. Let's not forget that Micromegas is banished from his home planet in the first place because he presented ideas which were contradictory to the establishment. In this way, Voltaire may be suggesting, in true satirical fashion, that the only universal truth is that there is no universal truth. But beings will continue to argue about it, no matter how big or small. Probably the most ambiguous part of the story is the ending. What does the book being blank mean? He spoke to them with great kindness, although in the depths of his heart, he was a little angry that the infinitely small had almost infinitely great pride. He promised to make them a beautiful philosophical book, written very small for their usage, and said that in this book they would see the point of everything. Most pessimistic interpretation here might be that Micromegas, with his vast cosmic conscience, simply believes that the point of everything is nothing at all. The universe does not have an inherent meaning, and trying to find such a thing, as the philosophers do, is utterly futile. If not even Micromegas knows the point of the universe, then who can? A more neutral explanation might be that there are words written on the pages, but humans are simply unable to comprehend them. Whether that be because they are beyond the capacity of our puny minds, or because we simply refuse to assimilate knowledge that might diminish our standing in the universe. At the same time, the book might simply be a well-meaning practical joke on the part of Micromegas. With the book, he might be saying to us, "I have no obligation to explain the universe to you," or even, "I won't give you the answers, you have to find them yourselves." It could also be another jab at religion. A sacred text claiming to know the point of the universe certainly sounds like just about every religious text ever written. Perhaps Voltaire is suggesting that Micromegas is the only one willing to show us the truth, that no book can contain such a thing. These are only a few of the limitless possible explanations, but the fun is that the ambiguity keeps us speculating, even almost 300 years later. What do you think the blank book could mean? Let me know. The reason I love this story so much is because it has only gained relevance as time has passed, especially now that we have become a spacefaring species. I'm going to make a bold claim here and say that Voltaire might be the first person ever to describe the overview effect, and he didn't even have to go to space to do it. The overview effect is a term coined by the author Frank White, and it describes the experience that both astronauts and cosmonauts have described upon seeing the Earth from space for the first time. It's a well-known psychological phenomenon among astronauts and cosmonauts that seeing the Earth in its entirety induces a profound sense of responsibility to protect our little planet. and a feeling that interspecies conflict is futile and pointless. A similar feeling was brought to the general public with Carl Sagan's famous pale blue dot, which he wrote in response to a 1990 photograph taken of the Earth by Voyager 1, in which our planet appears to be, well, nothing more than a pale blue dot. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another, and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. This is exactly the same idea that Voltaire touches on by setting the story from the perspective of a giant like Micromegas. By making Earth appear tiny on a cosmic scale, he humbles us by forcing us to face the insignificance of our conflicts and our dogmas in the grand scheme of the universe. While Voltaire perhaps took a more cynical approach to this revelation, Micromegas deserves to be read again and again, until we little atoms finally understand that we're better off sharing our world instead of fighting over every last inch of it, whether with swords or words. I'll leave you with a quote from Edgar Mitchell, an Apollo 14 astronaut, who said this about seeing the Earth from the surface of the moon. You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck and drag him 250,000 miles out and say, "Look at that, you son of a bitch." Like, comment, subscribe, and thanks for watching.